It's presented by a number of FAASTeam program managers in the Northeast here and throughout out west, out in St. Louis and down south. We're all here joining Dr. Pierre Mosher, who is our presenter this evening. Before we get started, I just want to talk for a moment about a couple of things with wings and aviation maintenance technician. So just want to mention that that you can document your training that we're having tonight on the FAAStafety.gov site by entering into the Wings program. It's excellent for online records retention. It's tailored to GA accidents that have occurred. We are monitoring all the accidents, and we try to push forward information that has been developed to try to mitigate the risk that's involved with those accidents, to try to reduce those accident rates. And that's all done on FAAStafety.gov. It's rather simple to register. You just, it's easy as 1, 2, 3. You go onto FAAStafety.gov and you create an account. You complete your Wings pilot profile. And then from there forward, you attend a Wings seminar, or you start doing Wings flights with your CFI, and all that is being tracked and in FAAStafety.gov in your Wings program. Wings also means a chance to win dollars, cash in your pocket. So the Wings Industry Advisory Committee has started up this program along with the support of Paul and Fran Berger. There's $10,000 that's available this year to those that go in onto this website, the www.mywingsinitiative.org, and sign in. And when you complete Wings pilot proficiency, you can record that and you get an automatic entry into it and give you a chance to get some cash in your pocket. This FAAStafety.gov also applies to aviation maintenance technicians. Just like pilots, you can log in and set up your profile, and then all the courses that you take here will get credited and get recognized on your account, your FAAStafety.gov account. We also are issuing IA refresher training credit for tonight's webinar. If you are an IA and you want to get a training certificate, I just ask that you'd email me a request for that certificate to my email right here. Earlier we talked about taking a screenshot that's on your control panel where you see the screens, and you just click on that and it will save that for you. So at this time, one of the FAASTeam program managers, Grant Gillian, is going to come on board and run some polling questions. Hi, Grant.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, we have some poll questions this evening we'd like to ask everybody, and so we'll get started with those. I think we have 3 questions. So the first question, we'd like to know who's attending this evening. Are you a pilot, mechanic, or both? We're winding down here. We're about 85%, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. I'd like to share with everybody. It looks like 75% are pilots, 10% mechanics, and 15% are both. Our next question. Are you aware of the fundamental medical differences between CBD and medical marijuana? So we'll just give it another couple of seconds. It looks like about 85 people have voted, 85%. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and share with you the results. It looks like 32% said yes, 43% said no, and 26% said they were unsure. So we got one more question. Like to launch it. Are you aware of the legality of CBD and medical marijuana as they apply to you as a pilot or an AMT? All right, it looks like about 90% of the people have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. Share the results. 28% said yes, 51% said no, and 21% were unsure. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating in tonight's poll. Greatly appreciate it. And Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate you launching those interesting results. I think that if we were to take these poll questions at the end of the seminar, we would have a different answer after Dr. Pierre's presentation. I would like to introduce Dr. Moeser, if I can get my mouse over on the screen here. There we go. Oh, before I introduce Dr. Moeser, this is just a reminder for us to start the recording tonight. This session will be recorded. It's going to be loaded up on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube site. Here is a link right here at the bottom of the page where you can do a screenshot and copy and save that if you want to. Or another way you can get it is just to Google Boston FAASTeam, YouTube, and you can get to that channel. And yes. And so I would just like to introduce our presenter tonight, Dr. Pierre Mosher. He's a physician with over 30 years of experience. He's a private pilot and a certified UAS pilot. He serves as president of several aviation groups and is a FAA Safety Representative. One of Dr. Moser's passions is educating aviation mechanics and pilots about medical factors and decision-making to improve safety outcomes. I first learned of Dr. Moeser at last year's Repair Station Virtual Safety Day seminar, where he presented on today's topic. I was so impressed by the content and timeliness of his presentation, I invited him to present virtually here with us this evening. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Pierre Mosher.
All right, thank you.
Yes. And I'm going to switch this over to your presentation. And Dr. Mosher, I'm going to give you the control of the mouse here just in a second. Here we go.
All right, I'm just going to test to see. This is, I want to see how to advance these slides here on this particular computer and see if this, okay, that was a little too sensitive. All right, I think we're back to beginning. So thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. Initially, when I did this talk on alcohol, over-the-counter medications, and cannabis, it was designed for pilots. Then later on, I gave it to two AMT groups, aviation medical technicians. So some of the slides you'll see are slanted more towards mechanics, but the beauty of this is that it really affects that all of the content is relevant whether you're a pilot or a mechanic or both. Because as pilots know, safety starts on the ground. It starts with the mechanics doing the right job under the right conditions, and then whatever is done on the ground is realized in the air when the pilot flies the airplane. So it applies to both. And after that lovely introduction, I don't really have to talk too much about myself, but just so you know, I'm on both sides of the equation. I'm a pilot that flies airplanes, and as a physician, I know about safety, and we don't need to say anything more about that. I am rather happy to see that in the past, we only talked about pilots and alertness and mental acuity in them because they're flying airplanes. And then over the past few years, we've seen a greater stress on mechanics doing the proper job. So for example, this is a poster sent to us from Italy, from Eleonora Abi, and she talks about an I'm Safe checklist, which pilots are very familiar with, for aircraft maintenance engineers. And again, they talk about illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and emotions, all things that would take away from mental alertness or acuity doing a proper job. So without any further ado, let's go over where we focused, why are we going to do more information and maybe a little less regulation in this talk? Why are we at this point, and where do we start? So the reason that I stress a lot of information is that humans they make their decisions based on what they know. They don't necessarily always go back to a regulation. They'll put the regulations in their mindset, but they'll say, I'm going to make a decision based on what I already know, what information I have. If you're driving down the road, for example, and there's a dangerous situation, you don't immediately start thinking about a regulation, like, can I do this? Is it legal? You're going to make a decision in an emergency situation based on the information at hand. How fast am I going? What is the road condition? How good are my brakes? How far is the accident? That sort of stuff. So a lot of information here. There will be regulations, but there's more information. Why are we at this point? Well, those of us in safety know that, bad things have happened, and the whole point of safety talks, is to prevent us repeating this same pattern, to try to break the pattern, keep things from happening again. So where do we start? Well, tonight we're going to do kind of an ambitious talk. We're going to do alcohol, OTCs, which are over-the-counter medications, CBD and medical marijuana. That's a lot in one talk, but I think if we compartmentalize it, you'll see where it all sort of flows together. So one of the key things that you'll hear me talk about, or that you need to know as you go through the slides, as you go through this talk, is we're really talking a lot about mental alertness. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary gives you this definition. I won't read it all, but it's that readiness to do something. Can you understand a situation? Do you understand an action? How do you act? Are you mentally alert? As almost we need a converse to that, decreased alertness. The big thing is it's a state of reduced awareness, but the fact that it's a serious condition. And that's from the U.S. National Library of Medicine. So let's get into decreased alertness. And we'll really look at three major areas: medical conditions, fatigue from any cause, and drugs and toxins. The first one of these, medical conditions, that's it's sort of intuitive that if you have heart failure or you've had trauma, any of these other conditions like liver or thyroid disease, you may not be at your best. You may not be mentally alert. Hypoxia is of great concern to pilots. It occurs insidiously, and sometimes, you know, we don't even notice that we're hypoxic, especially at night. And we have some decreased alertness, which could be even just visual changes. So these are things that we already kind of know are out there, because we think, well, if I'm in heart failure, I'm probably not fit to fly. As an AMT, I might not be fit to go to work. Hypoxia is probably the insidious one that we don't think about. If we talk about fatigue just in general, it could be those medical things. It could be poor diet, malnutrition, lack of sleep. Coffee machine is broken. That's not actually a joke. There is something called caffeine withdrawal syndrome, and some people just aren't alert until they get that first hit of coffee. It's an experiment I did myself. I won't go into a long story on that, but because it almost cost me my marriage, I substituted decaf coffee in my wife's morning coffee and checked to see if she noticed. Well, she noticed. So it's a real condition, caffeine withdrawal. And then, of course, the stuff that we're really going to concentrate on, drugs and toxins. Sure, toxins, poisons, recreational drugs, you know, getting high, doing other things like that. Prescription drugs, they always have a warning. We're not going to spend any time with that top three categories, because they're kind of intuitive, that yes, if you've been poisoned, you might not be alert if you're playing around with drugs, or even if you're prescribed drugs. The FAA has a list of drugs that are no fly. You know, you can't fly, and you should be checking with your AME if you are prescribed something. Is this something I can take, and can I fly with it? But the bottom three, the alcohol, the over-the-counter drugs, and the cannabis products, which include medical marijuana and CBD, that's really what we want to concentrate on in this presentation. So let's start with our old friend alcohol, because it's one that we know a lot of, and as pilots, we've heard this drummed into us about 50 million different ways. Same with mechanics. Yes, there's a regulation. In fact, in this regulation, excuse me, FAR 91.17, they list it over and over again. I mean, they say within 8 hours, you can't fly. While under the influence of alcohol, again, you can't fly. While having an alcohol concentration of greater than 0.04. You know, I mean, it's not just one way, but they mention it 3 different ways, that it's a prohibited substance. So that's pilots, but remember that this also applies to safety-sensitive transportation employees. And I have a bunch of them listed, and guess who's on top right there? Aviation maintenance personnel. You know, this is something that is not as old as the hills. People say, well, you know, was this always like this? No. In fact, if you look at aviation literature and you go back to how pilots used to fly the mail on a cold day in an open cockpit airplane, they'd say, well, I took a good swig of brandy to warm me up, and off I flew. If mechanic came to work drunk, you know what, he works just as well drunk as he does sober. And we know that's not true. But nowadays, yes, we have rules for both pilots and safety-sensitive employees. In fact, on this slide, you'll see that not only does the FAA take this very seriously, but there are regs for truckers and railroad workers. So, and then there's drug testing, of course, and this is not just for pilots, but here are some regs for aviation maintenance technicians to be drug tested or alcohol tested. So why do we pick on alcohol so much? Well, we pick on it because if we look at, and this is a part I threw in for the mechanics, it doesn't apply quite as strictly to pilots, but the same thing really does if we take out an excerpt, and the excerpt that I want to look at, because I don't want to read the whole creed, I want to look at the excerpt, and part of it says, knowing full well that the safety and lives of others are dependent on my skill and judgment, I shall never knowingly subject others to risk which I would not be willing to assume for myself or those dear to me. Now, that's in the mechanics creed, but you know that's the same as in a pilot's creed. No one would say, well, I was drunk and I took my family out for a little flight. You wouldn't do that. And that's something that we have in everyday life. If your kids or grandkids ask you to take them to the store and you've just knocked back a good stiff drink because it's the end of the day and you're enjoying yourself and you realize you have alcohol in your system, you wouldn't put them under that risk. Well, there it is, plainly stated in the mechanics creed, and pilots have the same obligation. So what are the effects of alcohol? Well, I'd say about 99% of us probably know these. Hopefully we haven't had alcohol to excess, but if you have alcohol in any concentration, in any amount rather, you can have difficulty concentrating, memory lapses, lack of coordination, poor decision making, and absenteeism. Well, that certainly affects mechanics quite a bit. So we say, okay, alcohol is bad, but maybe if I drank too much last night and this morning my alcohol level is 0, I'm just hungover, what are the effects of a hangover? And we see it's the same. It's actually exactly the same. So being hungover, you're technically under the effect of alcohol, but you don't have alcohol in your system. And people say, well, how can that be? So hangover symptoms actually peak when your blood alcohol concentration reaches 0. So again, hard for us to process intuitively, because we would think that, well, once I have the alcohol out of my system, I'll be fine. I'm hungover, I must still have alcohol. No, you might not have any alcohol. In fact, most of the time people don't have any alcohol left in their system, but then they're drowsy and they have the big thing of they can't think straight, which is impaired cognitive function. So that's why we're picking on this drug. It's nothing new, but I thought we would go over some of the technical details before we get into over-the-counter medications. Now, in over-the-counter medications, this is a little tricky, and I want to go over a point that is not on the slides first, and why were over-the-counter medications invented. They are medications. It's not some supplement. It's not ginkgo biloba. It's not, your grandmother's secret tea or anything like that. These are things that you buy in the store that are truly medications, but they're over the counter, meaning that you do not need a physician to write your prescription. So why are we going over these? Why don't we just leave them alone and skip this and go to CBD and medical marijuana? Well, because these things can actually be deadly. And the fact that they're over the counter almost reassures us that they're not deadly, but they are. In fact, if you look at OTC medications that were found post-mortem in pilots who crashed, diphenhydramine, which is in Benadryl, is one of the leading causes of death. Or actually, it is the leading cause of OTC death because it causes drowsiness. So it's a tricky point. It's also especially tricky for mechanics, because as mechanics, they say to them, mechanics will often say, well, geez, I feel lousy. I need to go to work because if I don't show up, the work won't get done. I'm too sick to go to work, but if I load myself up with over-the-counter medications, maybe I can concentrate at work. That may or may not be true, and we're going to go into that in a sec. So when we look at medication types, again, it's really 3 types. Prescription, FDA approved, that your doctor prescribes. Over-the-counter medications, are actually FDA approved medicines. So if you go to the store and you buy Advil, it's FDA approved. The rest is just crap you shouldn't be trying on yourself or family. We're not going to go into that. So the first thing we want to do when we attack the idea of an OTC, an over-the-counter medication, is we want to read the label. So we have to learn how to read the front, how to read the back. So as an example, here's Advil. Everybody's seen this, I'm sure. If they haven't used it themselves, it just tells you the tablets, tells you the milligrams, and that basically just identifies what it is. But on the back, and don't worry, I have a blow up of this for another medication. There's all these sections, and these sections will have directions and warnings and all that. So let's dissect that a little bit more. The two most important sections for pilots and mechanics are the warnings and the directions, which include the dosing interval. So in the warnings, what we're looking for is sedation, which is another word for drowsiness, impaired cognitive function. I can't think straight. And then that famous line that's, the butt of all jokes, use caution when driving a motor vehicle or operating machinery. Well, if you're flying, you're operating a motor vehicle. If you are operating machinery, if you're an AMT, you're operating machinery. But really what that says, why should you use caution? Because you might be drowsy. Of course, you also have to look at diarrhea and other unpleasant side effects. Certainly, if you're a pilot, diarrhea is a special problem, especially if you're flying solo or if you're in a small plane with no onboard lavatory. So going into a specific example, if we look at chlortrimeton, this is super common. People use this all the time for allergy. So again, we have the name, we say what it's for. It even has over here chlorpheniramine maleate. It's an antihistamine. It tells you what you use it for, it tells you how many tablets and the duration of action. But let's go to the back, because that's where the most important stuff for us is. So the first section we want to look for is the warning section. In the warning section, after, ask a doctor before use if you have in these conditions and all this. If we go down to the bottom part of this section, but certainly read the whole section, when using this product, excitability may occur, drowsiness may occur. All right, so already we've got something that tells us that we may encounter drowsiness if we use this product. And then, of course, at the very bottom, use caution when driving a motor vehicle or operating machinery. So we know this is already a drug that's going to give us trouble, because if we're going to take it and we have to be, remember the term, mentally alert, then we are already sacrificing that possibility because we may get drowsy with this medicine. To say, for example, oh, I don't get drowsy when I take stuff, doesn't really work that way. Sometimes drowsiness occurs and you don't notice it. I would venture to say that a lot of pilots who have died taking an antihistamine because of impaired function in the cockpit didn't think they were drowsy. I don't think they said, oh, I'm drowsy, I need to land. They probably said, well, I'm okay now that I've taken the medicine. So let's go to the next section, the directions. So what we're looking for is the dosing interval. That's what reads, take every 4 hours, take every 12 hours, take once a day, whatever. The longer the interval between doses, the longer the chance for potential side effects, right? Makes sense. So if the stuff lasts 24 hours, and then you take the next dose, you've got that drug's on board for a long, long time. If it's a short-acting drug, like you can take a pill every 4 hours, it has a longer chance for, or a shorter chance for potential side effects. So let's look at an example of this. So let's go back to the back of the chlortrimeton. This is the one that is an antihistamine. You don't have to memorize the fact that chlorpheniramine is an antihistamine. You don't actually have to know the medical name, because once you got down to the warning section, you saw that this can cause drowsiness. That's the more important thing to remember. So let's go over the direction side, and it says adults and children. So we're going to say adults. 1 tablet every 4 to 6 hours, not to exceed 6 tablets. But if you're going to take a pill every 4 hours, it's a fairly short-acting drug. So actually, it said it on the front of the chlortrimeton box that it was a 4-hour medicine. So you might say, okay, well, those 4 hours, that's definitely a no-no, because I'm kind of drowsy. I could be drowsy for those 4 hours. Now, I'm going to answer a question before it's asked, and that is, people will say, well, if it's 4 hours, then as soon as that second hand hits the 4-hour mark, I'm good to go. Well, the problem is that we don't know individually how quickly people metabolize every drug. So some people will be drowsy longer than 4 hours, some people shorter than 4 hours. And in 4 hours, the medicine is at a lower dose in your body, but it's still there. So the question is, how long should you wait before flying if you've taken a medicine that could cause drowsiness for 4 hours? Well, I mean, that is something that physicians and the FAA officials have debated for a long time, because we had to come up with a rule. And the rule is 5 dosing intervals, or 5 times the half-life. But really what we're looking at is the dosing interval. So something like this, you'd really want to wait 20 hours before you fly. Now, that seems like a lot. People will say, oh my God, I took this one little chlortrimeton, and now I'm waiting 20 hours. Well, think about it. You were sick. You were ill enough that you needed to take a medicine. You know, maybe you weren't in top shape from your illness, and now you have a medicine on top of that. You know, what's a good safety margin? For AMTs, you guys can interrupt me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a general set rule that's been devised. I know for pilots it's 5 times the dosing interval, but AMTs, it's kind of the same thing, though. It's if you think about it, you were sick, you're taking a medicine that could make you drowsy. You know, how long should you wait? Well, you want to wait till, number one, you're not drowsy from your illness, and number two, you're not drowsy from the medications. I've heard people say, oh yeah, you know, I wait 2 or 3 or 4 dosing intervals. Yeah, there's not a real science behind that, because it's individual. The problem, I think, and I didn't mention this in other talks, and I should have. One of the problems that is specific to aviation, and that is on the pilot side, on the mechanic side, is we have very few chances, very few second chances. I think if you're driving a car and you don't feel well, you pull over. You know, in a boat, okay, you have less of a chance if you're on an ocean, but a lot of times things are happening slowly, or you can slow the boat down, you can make it to shore, and you're not going to fall out of the sky. If you don't feel well, or you're drowsy and you're not paying attention as a pilot, things go downhill in a hurry. And the same thing for AMTs. Your job is so critical that if you just forget that one screw and something comes loose, or you reverse that one wire, there's not a lot of second chances. I will tell you personally, I'm a pilot. I'm also a licensed sailboat captain. I've driven motorcycles and I drive cars. And, you know, if I had to rank them in order of difficulty, piloting an airplane is definitely the most difficult. It's the most demanding. You have to be the most alert. So without further discussion on that, let's look and see who's on the drowsy list, because we've been talking about mental alertness. And I went over allergy medications, but it also includes sleep aids, antidiarrheals, and cough suppressants. And looking at this, okay, so antihistamines. Actifed, Benadryl, that's your diphenhydramine. Clotrimazole, we did the example. Anything that's an antihistamine can make you drowsy. They say, oh, there's the non-drowsy stuff. I'd be careful. They might not be true antihistamines. You'd have to look at the back to see, does it cause drowsiness? Cough suppressants, you know, who hasn't taken Vicks Formula 44 in their life, but it causes drowsiness. Antidiarrheals do, and the slide got hung up here. Oh, there it is. Oh, I don't want to go a little too fast. No big deal. So Imodium AD, Pepto-Bismol, sleep aids, that's just too obvious to really spend any time on. So one thing you want to do, again, we're still in the OTC category, is to get fooled by the name, because Tylenol, if you look at Tylenol, acetaminophen, does not cause drowsiness. So it's good. So anything that says Tylenol has to be okay. No. Tylenol allergy multi-symptom. It's the same manufacturer, but it's Tylenol with other stuff, such as chlorpheniramine, which is sedating, and phenylephrine, which is not. But the addition of chlorpheniramine makes a Tylenol product look okay, but it isn't. If you look at Advil, one of the most common pain relievers around, ibuprofen, not a problem. You can fly with it, you can work with it. But if you say, I took an Advil PM because that's all I had in the house, and I didn't, you know, or I took a bunch of it in the middle of the night because I was hurting so much and it said PM. I mean, that makes sense. It's PM, it's the middle of the night and I'm hurting. Oh, wait a minute, I just took diphenhydramine, which is heavily sedating. So you have to be careful. And you know, again, OTCs, they're legal. You can buy them without a prescription, but they could be dangerous. So my approach to OTCs is to look at these four things. Should I be working if I have a condition for which I want to take an OTC? Well, if you have a splitting headache, or you haven't slept, or you have tremendous diarrhea, or you're really sick with the flu or something, you know, should you be working at all? If you say, well, you know, I have a mild headache, it's not going to really interfere with stuff, I want to take an OTC, okay. Then did you read the drug facts section, which is that back part of the box or the bottle? Did I look at the warnings and the directions? Are there significant side effects? Mainly, will it cause drowsiness? Yeah, sure. We also want to know about diarrhea and dizziness, of course, especially if we're flying. We don't want to be dizzy. And if there are significant side effects, what's a dosing interval? The longer the medicine's in your system, or the longer the dosing interval, the longer it's in your system, the more chance you have for side effects. So now we're going to get into CBD and medical marijuana. And I'm very thankful for the polling questions because, yes, this is confusing. This is really confusing. So we have a marijuana leaf there, or a hemp leaf, and we'll get into that. And it's on a green cross there, which seems to apply health. So what about medical marijuana or THC or CBD? You know, what's the difference? Where are we going with all this? CBD is a terminology you can't get away from. It's on every billboard. THC, yeah, people don't talk as much about THC, but those of us who know what THC is, we think, oh yeah, somebody's getting high. But then when we talk about medical marijuana, is it, you know, THC? Is it CBD? You know, what is it? So let's go over some terminology. First of all, cannabis, that's the plant's botanical name. The genus is called cannabis. And people will say, oh, but I've heard of cannabis sativa, indica, ruderalis. Yeah, they're all the same plant, really, basically, slight differences. But let's not spend too much time on that. Then people will say, oh, well, somebody gave me this this oil, and they called it hemp oil. But is it really marijuana oil? And that's confusing because now I've got another term to remember. And to tell you the truth, it's all hemp. Cannabis is a hemp plant. So we think, okay, that clarifies about nothing. Because now with hemp, I've learned you can make rope out of it. I actually own a hemp shirt. It's very comfortable. It's like linen. But other people say it has health benefits, and other people say they're playing around with it. So it's recreational use. So does that help me? And where are we going with that? So here I would say for mechanics and pilots, forget the cannabis sativa ruderalis, forget that nonsense. Forget the hemp versus marijuana. Forget what your friends tell you. Forget what the internet tells you. The terms are unreliable, and so are the plants. The plants, even though people used to say, well, ruderalis makes rope, sativa gets you high. If you put the two plants close together, they all get you high. So it's unreliable. So let's go over something that's a little bit more reliable, and let's understand CBD versus THC, because that's where really the rubber hits the road. Cannabis, as we remember, is the plant's botanical name. Cannabinoids are hundreds of compounds you can get out of the plants, and the two most important ones for us are THC and CBD. So yes, there's a long form, tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol, but what's the difference? Well, in tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, when people generally talk about marijuana or getting high recreationally, you can see psychoactive high under there, or medical marijuana, they're talking about THC. So that has a real obvious effect. So if you just want to use the old-fashioned term getting high, yes, THC is what gets you high. It's also in medical marijuana, and we'll go into state laws and federal laws in a sec. But it's that stuff that, people say is quote unquote bad. And then we have this new emergent product, which is obtained from the same plants, called cannabidiol. And cannabidiol, when people talk about hemp, again, not an accurate term. They're usually talking about this, or people talking about CBD oil, or I took some drops, or my knee hurts, so my friend gave me some CBD gummies. Yeah, that's a little different product. It's a very different product in that it doesn't get you high. CBD does not get you high. So if somebody says, oh, I took some CBD gummies, I'm really tripping. No, the CBD doesn't get you high. It has some psychoactive properties, but it doesn't get you high. But these are the terms that are reliable: THC, CBD. So let's do THC first. And we're not going to talk about recreational use. We're going to talk about medical marijuana. Somebody's been prescribed in a state in which it's legal, medical marijuana. Now, what's it used for? Nausea, glaucoma, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, pain, and nerve pain. None of them are actually FDA approved. None. That doesn't mean it isn't legal by the state, but they're not FDA approved. If you ask me, Dr. Moeser, does this really work? It does. There are people that have terminal pain due to some nerve disease. There are some people that, especially nausea after chemotherapy. Yes, medical marijuana does work in these people, but the studies have not been conclusive enough for the FDA to say we now approve them. So that's medical marijuana, or THC. Now let's contrast that to CBD. And CBD, that's the oils, the drops, the gummies, that sort of stuff. There you're talking about a lot of the pain stuff again: chronic pain, multiple sclerosis pain, arthritis. But you're also talking about diabetes, insomnia, and two rare types of childhood seizures. Those childhood seizures are the only FDA-approved indications. Does it work? Yes. Yes, it does. I will tell you that from a personal experience with my patients. I don't have any of these conditions. I have never tried CBD, Don't have any reason to. But yes, I have patients who take it for their arthritis or their multiple sclerosis pain. It works in some people, some people. Could it have a psychological or placebo effect? It could. But again, largely, again, not FDA approved, except for those two types of childhood seizures. But it's definitely, I wanted to go back here, let's see. So it's definitely that has a wide variety of applications, and these you will find now literally everywhere. So let's go over some side effects. So let's say you take medicinal THC or medical marijuana, and you say, okay, you know, I'm taking it for whatever I've got. Let's say my nausea, or I'm having a problem with pain. What are the side effects? Well, again, there's our friend drowsiness, problems with concentration, problems with memory. So that's the THC side. And people kind of say, well, I kind of guessed that because it's THC. I'm thinking along the line of if you take a bunch of it, you could get high, and that's the recreational side. But CBD wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, CBD would. CBD would. And it could cause drowsiness. The diarrhea, the lightheadedness, low blood pressure, okay, those are bad things. It's certainly lightheadedness in pilots or diarrhea in anybody, low blood pressure in anybody. But the big thing is they can cause drowsiness. So it's not like now we're into the CBD category, so we have nothing to worry about because we're not in THC, so CBD has to be okay. Nope, it's the same thing. It's another drug or another thing that can cause drowsiness. So now the thing that people have the most trouble with is if they understand the difference between CBD and medical marijuana or THC in any form, they'll say, is it legal? Can I take it at work? Can I take it at home? How about my state, Missouri, Illinois, any other state? So the very clear distinction is that THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is an illegal drug under federal law. It is still a class 1 narcotic. It is illegal. There is no way around it. Federal law, it's illegal. Now, that's a big deal. But state laws, they're all over the place. Some states like Colorado, you can get high if you like. You can smoke as much weed as you want because it's legal for recreational use. Other states, you say, hey, medical marijuana, yeah, THC, I could get high, but it's legal if I have a medical condition. Or other states, like the one that's right next to Colorado, Wyoming, you can't have THC at all. It's totally illegal. But that's state law. Remember, federal law is different. It's always illegal. If we go to CBD, federal law, it is legal. Because remember, it doesn't get you high. It doesn't have those psychoactive properties of euphoria or the munchies or anything like that. But it's illegal if you put it in food or beverage, if it's sold as medicinal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth of the matter is these laws are not enforced because CBD gummies would be illegal, and there's plenty of CBD gummies out there. And they're sold as medicinal by dispensaries and places that do CBD. The states literally cannot enforce these laws, but it is federally legal. So that'll bring us to the next thing for mechanics and pilots. Is THC okay? Is CBD okay? Well, that's kind of easy to explain the first one, THC, because we're under federal jurisdiction. It's the Federal Aviation Administration. Federal law says it's illegal. So no, you can't have THC in your system and fly an airplane. You can't be a safety sensitive employee, an AMT and IA, and have THC in your system. It's because of federal law being illegal. Now CBD, you can say it's legal. There are certain exceptions that exist, but the big thing is, and the state laws vary, but now you have to ask yourself a different question. You don't have to ask yourself the question of legal, you have to ask yourself a question of why. And the reason is that and we'll get to that in a little bit more detail in the future. I'm sorry, in a few minutes. You're asking yourself the question of why am I taking CBD? So before we get into that, let's look at some problems with CBD. And the CBD really has three major areas of concern. One is that if you take a CBD product, it has to have THC less than 0.3%. Remember, they come from the same plant. CBD is the legal stuff, THC is the federally illegal stuff, but there's always a little bit of THC in a CBD product, almost always. So you have to know how pure is your source. So you get it from the guy on the street. Is it an FDA approved vendor? Oh, wait a minute, it's never FDA approved. So you're really kind of at the mercy of the person who produces it because there's no standard or on the labels. And the second thing, you have to remember that CBD, has side effects. And we talked about the first one, which is, drowsiness. You don't want diarrhea either, but drowsiness is a big one. And remember that you're safety sensitive if you're an AMT and IA. And remember, you're a pilot if you're flying an airplane. You cannot really tolerate a lot of these side effects. And now we'll get into the why. So you have to ask yourself, why am I taking this? Oh, I have a medical condition they say can be helped by CBD. Yeah, that's not that great. So if you say, well, I have this incredibly painful arthritis, CBD might help it. Okay, so you're gonna put all your eggs in that one basket to say that CBD is gonna help my arthritis as I fly, so my arthritis won't disturb me as I fly, and the CBD won't cause drowsiness or other side effects. So that's not really the best reason. That's not great logic. And an example too is I don't know why I'm taking CBD, and that's a problem. That's sort of like ginkgo biloba. It helps my memory if I remember to take it. So the other thing is that you want to be aware that if you get drug tested, let's say there's an incident in something, and you as a pilot, you as a mechanic, are now undergoing drug testing. Well, let's say that CBD that you bought at what you thought was a reputable dealer had a lot of THC in it. Okay, now you're busted for THC, even though you thought you were taking CBD. The labeling doesn't protect you because it's not FDA approved. You're misled or misguided, that's on you. Or you didn't know, again, no protection from the law. I would add that, and I didn't put this in because we have so many slides. I see we've got only a couple left, but one of the problems I will tell you on the medical analysis side is that the way the testing is done for THC, some tests are really, really good. Like if you go to the CAMI in Oklahoma City, they do phenomenal testing, and they can tell you 50,000 different types of cannabinoids. But if you go to a small local hospital, some of the testing is rather crude, and CBD may actually show up as THC if they do it by a certain method. And then the report will say pilot so-and-so or AMT so-and-so tested positive for THC, even though it was CBD. So it's something to think about. That brings us to the final answer. If you're a pilot or a mechanic, THC absolutely not if you're working or flying an airplane, because it is always illegal. It's against federal law. And in CBD, you've got a little bit of legality on your side because it's federally legal. But the question is, why are you taking it? What is that condition? Is that a condition that you should not be working as an AMT? You should not be flying an airplane. And then remember that as you take something, CBD is not an over-the-counter medicine. It's a supplement. It's an FDA. It's non-FDA regulated supplement. Remember that you could get side effects from from that supplement, from the CBD. So that was a lot. We did alcohol, which is generally fairly obvious, but we stressed the importance of the hangover there. That doesn't mean that your alcohol level is 0, that you're fine, you're good to go. We did the dangers of over-the-counter medicines, and then we did a division between THC and CBD. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you. And if there are questions, I'll let our moderator go forward with that.
Awesome, Dr. Moeser. Boy, what an excellent presentation. Very timely. Just answered a lot of questions that I know I had in my mind, as well as others. So Steve Brown or John Wood or Grant, could you guys look at the questions and see if there's any questions that we'd like to ask Dr. Moeser this evening?
Yeah, I'll let the other FPMs, they've been working on answering the questions, but while they're looking at developing which ones to ask, I will specifically point out the thing that I really liked about this was the question of why may you be taking a supplement with CBD. You know, that's really a good avenue to take a look at asking that question, whether it's an over-the-counter medication or whether, you know, the questions that people have here about CBD products that may be out there commercially available. You know, the quality control is a big aspect to it. That's why we have in the handouts the briefing from the FAA Safety Briefing magazine last year on it, to try to help you to recognize that there really is not any quality control with it with most commercially available things. And if you are looking at it as a way to help you, you need to ask, why do you need that help? And is that going to have an effect on my ability to act as an AMT or as a pilot? So I don't know, for the others out there, what do we have for some good questions for Dr. Moeser?
I'll ask the first one. Hey, Dr. Moeser, I know you've touched on this throughout the presentation, but what do you think the threshold for THC in the system